Bonsoir et bienvenue.
Good evening and welcome to the Birdhouse. Excellency, Vice President of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, who's following us online and who will be joining us very soon, representatives of international organizations and non-governmental organizations, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody following us online. There are many of you again for this session, 180 people spread across Europe and beyond Europe. Welcome. Dear friends, my name is Mario Fetz. I'm the Secretary General of the Fondation Apprentis d'Auteuil International. We're very happy to welcome you here as part of the International Day for Children in Street Situations. We're welcoming you here to the Birdhouse this evening. It's a restaurant which is quite different from other restaurants. And I'm saying that for those of you who have just joined us, because people who were with us for the first session already heard this information, or we had a conference earlier on, in fact. So this restaurant is an integration restaurant that provides young people with a diploma. It gives them a second chance, people who have dropped out of school. So we train 15 apprentices, and it's the third year that we're training these apprentices, and we train them elsewhere as well. You will have the opportunity, in fact, to taste their wares and talk with them during the buffet and cocktail. So you'll be able to talk to them and learn about their experience. At the Birdhouse, these young people can build up self-trust thanks to a team of trainers in the kitchen and front of house trainers, and thanks to coaches and educators. You will be able to talk with them later on, as I've said, just after the conference. I now have the great pleasure to hand over the floor to the Vice President of the Fondation Apprentis d'Auteuil International, Mr. Fermenic. Then we'll have an introductory speech by Philip Jaffé, Vice President of the Committee on the Rights of the Child. Then we will hear from Mr. Alfonso Gomez, councilor for the city of Geneva, who will tell us over the course of the evening and who will be giving the closing speech. So, Vice President, Mr. Fermenic, you have the floor. Thank you, Mario. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm very happy to be able to close this series of conferences, and I would like to wish you a warm welcome to this meeting, which is the closing of the series of conferences as part of the International Day for Children in Street Situations. So those of you who were not with us yesterday need to know that the foundation, its vocation is to accompany children and families in vulnerable situations. It does this in partnership with local organizations across the world. From Geneva, the FAAI carries out advocacy in favor of children's rights, especially children in street situations who are forgotten about by society. Yesterday, we discovered who the different children are, the girls and boys. They are victims of violence, but they're very resourceful, these children. They have been forgotten about and their rights are not respected. And yet, this phenomenon concerns all countries across the world. Supporting families is one of the main commitments of the FAAI and its partners in the field. This afternoon, we've seen that protecting children involves supporting families, allowing them to play their role fully and bring up their children. This evening, we will be focusing on how we can get their rights respected, especially the rights of these children in street situations. It involves working so that they can build their future. It means allowing them access to education, to training, and help so that they can get onto the job market, we're talking about young people in difficulties, but this is all part of the DNA of the foundation. This evening, we are launching a call for mobilization because it's only together that we can offer solutions, find the right kind of solutions so that we can make space for these children in our societies. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Above all, I would like to congratulate the Fondation Apprentis d'Auteuil International for this successful event, for the initiative, because of the organization of the conferences. I have no doubt that this event has contributed to making this issue much more visible, this very painful issue that has been described in different details. It is basically a violation of children's rights. And with my colleagues on the Committee on the Rights of the Child, we are in charge of this issue. I would like to say a certain number of things. I heard things yesterday that inspired me. There were 3 sentences. Let me remind you that the Committee on the Rights of the Child is a body with 18 members. It's independent. Its main task is to encourage states 186 to implement the provisions of the Convention of the United Nations on Children's Rights. It involves a whole program, 2 billion children. So that's a lot. And our role as, and I liked the expression used by my friend Najat Mijda, yes, we are pneumatic drills where, you know, we basically hammer them. We can't leave them alone. But however, we can't replace states. It's up to states to implement the right kind of provisions. However, this evening, what I want to do is to underline another essential mission that concerns us, that's concerned us a lot over the past few days. The Committee on the Rights of the Child has a focus, and that is children in street situations. And it's thanks to this time that's been lasting since 2015, 16 and 17. It's thanks to the drawing up of general comments that this theme has taken off, so to speak, and people are seeing it and on the international scene. It's also thanks to this that we're here today. I think there's a chronological theme that we have to take into account. Now, the drawing up of the general comments, this is a very interesting process. We're actually drawing up other general comments for another theme. It's a process that brings together different consultations, so the consultation of different civil societies, NGOs, states, children, all of the specialized stakeholders, and we try and align our efforts so that we create this document that can help and guide states, but can also be used as a lever by NGOs so that things start to move and change, especially, you know, with respect to this question of children in street situations. Now, you have heard then collaborating. I use the words of Mr. Firmenich. We have to collaborate. We have to come together. So UN people, but the UN is one authority. There's the Committee on the Rights of the Child on the other, but states as well. There are certain members that are showing a lot of determination when it comes to this issue. And then there are organizations belonging to civil society. There's the Apprentis d'Auteuil Foundation, and we're very happy to count on your investment and the investment of all your partners and our partners. You will have heard my colleague on the Committee on the Rights of Child, Mrs. Hynd, who is with us. She will be backing up that message with respect to the role of the committee on that question and the fact that we are partners, and you need to call on us if you want to move forward with your actions when it comes to this issue. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Philippe. And I have the pleasure to invite onto the stage Tony Burgener, who will be moderating this third session, or final session, along with all of our guest speakers. And you have the floor, Tony. So there we are. Good evening and welcome to this third debate. As you can see, the title is Protecting Children in Street Situations. It's a vast subject, and we're going to try and make it as concrete as possible so that it resonates. So I would like to say hello to all of the online listeners who have joined us. The debate will be here in the room, but you will all have the possibility of asking questions here in the room, but also those of you following us online. And can I ask you to let us go through the first part of the discussion and to send in your questions then, and then the last 20 minutes will allow us to have some questions and answers sessions, and hopefully the debate will be as lively as possible. So here are our guest speakers, Mrs. Ayoubi Idrissi, Vice Chair of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and you are in Morocco, I believe. Yes, great. It's a pleasure to meet you, madam, and to see you. You can see that she is on the screen as well. Next to me, I have Mrs. Lucy Halton.
For those who don't have yet the headphone, for those who need translation, they can get it. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas la traduction peuvent l'avoir. We will have on aura une intervention en anglais.
So we have one presentation in English, but everything else will be in French. But of course, you will have simultaneous interpreting for those of you who are following us remotely. You'll be able to follow the debate either in French or English. But Lucy understands French very well. She doesn't need translation. So there we are. So next to me, I have, I'm not very good with names, I have Laura Hendricksen, who is International Director for the Fondation d'Auteuil. She is going to give us the point of view of the foundation when it comes to the subject of the debate. And then we'll be going out to the field. We'll be going to Congo with Mr. Joseph Likibi, who coordinates a network of associations who are in charge of children in street situations. So we'll be hearing from the field, therefore, and then we'll be hearing about another kind of field, and that field will be shared with us by Dedho. Dedho, who, for those of you who were with us last night, you will know this. He told us his history, his story. We won't go through it over again, but for those of you who didn't follow the conference last night, it is recorded. You can follow it on the site of Apprentis d'Auteuil, and I recommend that you do this because, and for both of the first debates, because you know, the discussions were very deep. We heard about Dedho yesterday as a child living in a street situation, and then we heard about when he was an adult and how he came to be in contact with the Apprentis d'Auteuil and how he became a florist. So that's it for the speakers this evening. Now, in the first part, so there were three parts for the debate. We'll be talking about those who we talked about last night. How do we give young people a voice? We have to listen to them. This is what we said earlier on when we were talking about young actors, you know, young protagonists. They have to be able to focus on their own developments.
Il faut les écouter. Et puis ça, c'est la première.
We need to begin by listening to them. For this, we'll watch a short video where we allow children in street situations to express themselves.
Ma grand-mère, commençait à marcher avec elle, a été trop passée des histoires que le pasteur lui avait rencontrées. Directement dans la rue, je ne connaissais même pas là-bas. Elle m'a dit, attends-moi ici, j'arrive. Je commençais à l'attendre, j'ai commencé à l'attendre. Du coup, il est devenu 16 h, je ne l'ai pas vu. Je commençais à demander aux gens, on a dit, on n'a pas vu la dame, on n'a pas vu la dame. Et moi, je me suis dit, peut-être elle m'a abandonnée. Maintenant, quand il se faisait tard, j'ai eu peur et directement, je suis allée à la commune. Les gens, s'ils ont des problèmes, peut-être on l'a volé, quelque chose de mauvais, ils partaient à la commune, au poste de la police, pour exprimer son problème. Moi aussi, j'étais allée là-bas, je les ai expliqué mon cas, non, rien réagi, n'ont pas du tout prêté attention.
Un niño no está en la calle porque quiere, simplemente por una necesidad, o de repente por una dificultad o un daño que se le esté causando.
Il y a des gens qui les considèrent comme s'ils sont de voleuses, bien de voleurs, de bandits. Mais quand tu pars chez eux, si tu ne les connais pas, si tu te poses des questions, tu essaies de causer avec eux, tu vas entendre qu'ils ont de l'amour. Mais ce sont des gens qui ont transformé de l'amour en haine.
Es un gusto de un niño que vaya a trabajar y que se gane dinero, o de repente que pase frío en las noches, o que alguna persona lo trate mal por ser un niño de la calle, ¿no? Si tú no sabes la situación que está pasando ese niño y lo juzgas sin saber, entonces, y no eres capaz de ayudarlo, entonces mejor no lo juzgues, ¿no?
Dormir en la calle es lo peor que puedes pasar. Cuando vives en la calle, hay veces con el aspecto que tienes, las personas no te quieren ni contratar para un trabajo y muchas veces no tienes ni dinero para comprarte una comida.
Nous, les gens qui vivent sur la route, ne sont pas des criminels, ne sont pas des bandits. Non. On est des normales personnes comme vous. Les gens qui nous ignorent sur la route parce que nous sommes sales, on sent mauvais. Non. Non, c'est vrai, on sent mauvais parce que nous sommes sur la route. Même si tu t'approches avec une personne, il t'ignore à cause de ça, ou bien tu approches de lui, il fait comme ça, pour l'odeur.
Hay muchas personas que discriminan a los demás por su lugar de origen o por donde vienen y muchas veces se vulneran el derecho de los demás.
Autre chose difficile, quand nous restons dehors, c'est l'agression, l'insultation et le racisme. Parce que l'agression, c'est pour racisme. Et l'insultation aussi, c'est pour racisme.
Qu'il arrête le racisme. Nous, les gens qui vivent sur la route et les gens qui vivent dans leur propre maison, nous tous nous sommes les mêmes. Nous tous nous sommes des humains.
He conocido a personas en las cuales me han aconsejado como un padre, y he conocido a personas en las cuales me han despreciado, ¿no? Me han despreciado, me han humillado. Otros que que no me han visto como algo diferente, ¿no? Como si fuera de repente algo especial o algo raro.
Les jeunes qui nous embêtaient me coupaient en pied, me taillaient en pied, oui. Avec une bouteille.
Aprendí a ser fuerte, aprendí que no tienes que hacer lo que te diga, no tienes que hacer caso lo que te diga la gente. Y como les digo, tienen que tomar las cosas buenas y deshacerse de las cosas malas.
Je dors toujours dehors, mais pendant la journée, je marche. Pendant la journée, je fais les titres. Et pendant la journée, je fais l'entraînement. L'entraînement me fait trop du bien parce que quand je fais l'entraînement, je me déconnecte de tout. Je partage l'entraînement avec autres personnes et tout, je rigole là, mais quand l'entraînement finit là.
Mientras que uno vive en la calle y no tenga alguien que le pueda guiar, quien le pueda orientar, quien le pueda hablar sobre qué es lo que tiene que hacer a esa edad un niño, entonces...
Et quand il vient en rue, il est indépendant. Personne ne le dit quoi que ce soit. Donc il pense que tout ce qu'il fait est bien. Et pourtant, ce n'est pas tout ce qu'il fait qui est bien. Il faut essayer de le sensibiliser seulement. Tout est possible pour moi. Si les enfants ont des appuis, des gens qui peuvent les soutenir, qui peuvent les amener à apprendre des métiers, c'est possible. C'est possible.
Voilà, je trouve que c'était des témoignages extrêmement forts.
It's a very strong testimony that we've just heard. It's worth listening to. It's a reality that you've been through. Did you have the same perceptions that these young people have about children in street situations? They express very well how they're seen by others, and that's what hurts them. That's what makes them feel bad. Is that what you feel when you're in a street situation? I realize that it's important to be clean, because if you're dirty, it works against you. They explain it very well. People don't want to come near you because you smell. So that the way other people look at you is something that can really set in children's minds, create an identity for them. It's like a label on them. When people look at us, they maybe don't do it on purpose, but we feel the judgment, and the kids feel it, how they're being looked at. People that don't have time to look at them, people who avoid them because they're dirty. The way people look at children is the connection between the children in street situations and the rest of the world. Well, it's difficult to see how you're perceived. Yes, it adds to the problems, but it could be something that saves you. You could start with this look and provide something to these children and not take something away. You could give them some dignity. Joseph, in the work that you do every day in Congo, Brazzaville, to be precise, do you try to change the perception of people on the children in street situations? Yes, when you listen to the children, that was on a screen, but they need us to listen to them. And we're in environments where we don't know how to listen to people anymore. We don't hear their suffering. Our eyes don't see it. Our hearts, our ears, our eyes aren't feeling it. In Brazzaville, in the middle of the 1990s, after the restructuring that we experienced, we had a lot of children in the street, in street situations that no one wanted to see, no one wanted to listen to. They were discriminated against, they were excluded. And what we did was to create a shelter where the children could go and be heard. They weren't necessarily coming to ask us things, but at least they had a space where they could wash, where they could rest when they're tired. No one judges them, no one is controlling them, but they needed that space. And then they felt more confident. And that's what's lacking in our society now, where we're going at 100 kilometers an hour all the time. The people who are suffering feel terrible. They have nothing to give. Asking for someone to listen to them is complicated. They can't. In their condition, they already feel diminished. And it's with partners that we were able to create this first listening center in Brazzaville that still exists today. It's a week, it started, and sometimes it's 4 days because we need personnel available to run the center, to turn the water on, to open the showers. But we showed that we want to help, that it's open from morning until evening, and any child who needs a rest, who needs to talk, can come to the center, and they say what they have to say, and no one judges them. So we have some very strong testimonials about what it's like in the field. But when you work in Paris at the Apprentis d'État, you think about this. Is it taken into account the negative perception from adults, from the environment on the children, that it has an impact on their psychology? Do you take that into account in your strategy, if we can say it that way? Yes, of course. To add to what Joseph and Dedho said, what strikes us on a daily basis when we talk to young people and our partners, when they listen, they feel discriminated against. That's the first thing that they share before having access to healthcare, education, food. That's really something that impacts them. The way the society looks at them causes them a lot of suffering, and that they bring inside themselves, and they keep inside of them for years, even when they're off the streets. And at Apprentis d'État, with our partners, we want to change that look that the community has, that people have on these young peoples. It will allow them to change their stories and to move forward on their life path. And we see that today there's still a lot left to be done. Recently, we carried out a study in Madagascar, and what was striking is how these young people feel humiliated, diminished, ignored, because the way people look at them or the way people ignore them.
Maybe a little bit, is this taken into account also? You're in charge of a consortium for street children. Is this taken into account when you are having discussions with being the authorities, with states, with other actors in the field of this domain? Is there something you take into account as well when you're doing your advocacy?
Yeah.
You're in charge of legal advisor and advocacy at the Street Children Consortium.
Yes, absolutely. And just maybe to briefly introduce us, so the Consortium for Street Children is a global network of over 200 organisations working around the world with children in street situations. We were heavily involved with the development of the general comment, which we will come on to shortly. And on a day-to-day basis, we do advocacy at the UN level, and we also work directly with these 200 members of our network to support them in the direct service provision that they do to build their advocacy capacity and to come together as a collective, strong voice for children in street situations. And on this question of stigma and discrimination, absolutely, we take it into consideration strongly, because we see that discrimination is both a cause and a consequence of children ending up on the streets. Many children in street situations come from backgrounds where they've been discriminated against, and that's the reason that they have ended up on the streets in the first place. And once on the streets, that discrimination is perpetuated, and in addition, children find themselves experiencing intense discrimination because of their status of being on the streets. And for instance, during COVID-19, this has actually become a deadly discrimination for these children who have been physically unable to access sanitary provisions, hand washing, face masks, and the things that they need to survive during a pandemic. The discrimination has a really deep impact and affects, as Laura was saying, all aspects of the lives of these children. So it, as you were saying, it's often the starting point for our advocacy because it has such a great ripple effect.
Voilà, peut-être Madame Ayoubi, ici de votre côté aussi, est-ce que c'est aussi un starting point? Est-ce que c'est aussi, voilà, la cause et les conséquences?
Is it always a cause and consequence? Is it taken into account at your level, at state level? Do you talk about concrete things with them, or do you talk about legal aspects? And we'll talk about that later on, maybe. Yes, hello. Sorry, I think I missed half of the questions, but I understand what you said. First of all, let me say that I'm delighted to be with you to take part in this major event. It's very important, this event. It will always be important, and we will always need lots of events like this on this kind of theme. So when we see states, we remind them of their obligations. We don't talk about the legal aspects. Most of the time, legal aspects, or in most cases, states have made progress when it comes to legislation and how it's applied. However, where there is a problem, we often remind them that it's the application of the laws that is not being followed properly. We talk about children in street situations, and often we've noticed that there are different situations. So there is awareness, but at different degrees, increasingly. So when we adopted General Comment 21, we've had more awareness on behalf of states, but again, at very different levels, at different degrees. And if I were to summarize, this awareness hasn't automatically led to managing these children in street situations, taking care of them according to a law. So there's still this social approach that is predominant. In fact, sometimes there's a tendency towards a repressive approach when you see the increase in criminality and which is associated with children in street situations. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child reminded us of this. You have to be concrete. It's not just enough to have a legislative framework, which is more or less in harmony with the provisions of the Convention. What's important is to have something that is efficient and that works. So we're already talking about law and protecting children, but for everybody to follow the discussion, can we hear about the legal instruments that exist so that we've got a common base for discussion? You don't have to give me a half-hour presentation, but just remind us of the different instruments that exist today and who they are for. Well, there are many different instruments when it comes to human rights. But of course, let's focus on the Convention of the Rights of Children, which is an important instrument. It's made up of 54 articles that concern the protection of children's rights during when they're born, survival, protection, participation. So it's a very broad-reaching instrument. Now, the thing that's most important is the change in the way children are conceived. They're not an object of law. They are a subject of law. So all of their rights that need to be implemented for children, it's because they're entitled. It's not about philanthropy. It's not about charity. We're talking about people who are entitled to rights that need to be recognized, and they are full human beings. So that's the main instrument. And there are 3 optional protocols to protect children. And there's another protocol that protects children who are victims of prostitution and pornography. And then there's a third protocol, which makes it possible. It's a protocol that makes it possible to make this Convention on the Rights of Children even more concrete. It allows children to approach the Committee on the Rights of the Child if they are victims of violated rights. But there have to be prerequisite conditions that are fulfilled first. So at Apprentis d'Auteuil, at what legal level are you involved? Is it advocacy? At what level can you interfere in order to help there to be a change? Maybe it's the convention, or there are other instruments that you use.
Which level can you intervene that you can have or may have an impact?
Comme le dit Madame, effectivement, la Convention internationale des droits de l'enfant, c'est
Well,
vraiment un texte.
the Convention on Children's Rights, it's a reference that we use, notably when it comes to advocacy with our partners, so that the International Convention is really followed and implemented by states, and our partners work on that. What we observe is that obviously children's rights are often a consensual subject. It's rare in our work that the states recognize the importance of children's rights. However, what we're seeing is that often there's this legal framework that you mentioned, Madam. There are laws that exist in countries, but they're not necessarily applied. And that's where our focus is. And when it comes to children in street situations in particular, a lot of our advocacy focuses on the fact that they are children above everything. Why are they not considered according to the policies, the laws that are in place? So this brings us back to discrimination. Why are these children sometimes forgotten about? Why are they considered as not quite, falling within the framework of children's protection? So it involves an awful lot of work, dialoguing with states, reminding them of their commitments. They ratified the National Convention on Children's Rights. It's a strength for us, this convention. And then, of course, and perhaps Lucy will talk about this, there's a text that we use a lot today, and that is the General Comment 21, which was adopted in 2017 by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And so when the convention didn't necessarily mention children in street situations. So it was necessary to adopt this comment to provide states with something very clear about what they can do, especially for children in street situations, in order to fulfill their commitments.
The Observatory 21, I don't know how it's called in English, Observatory 21, or have you been involved in this, and what's the process that led to this, and what is finally the result of this?
Yes, absolutely. So the English term is General Comment 21. So no, it's not obvious. So I'm just switching back into my brain into English mode. And we were heavily involved in this process. We led the civil society action leading to the development of General Comment 21. And it was not a process that came out of nowhere. There were many, many years of work that went into this. So without getting too bogged down in the human rights language, the process started in the Human Rights Council, where there was what's called a day of general discussion through the Committee on the Rights of the Child. There was then a resolution in the Human Rights Council about children in street situations. And all of this was about drawing attention to a population that had not necessarily been considered when instruments like the Convention on the Rights of the Child were drafted. So really shining a spotlight onto them and helping states to understand, because there is a question of understanding. States often say to us, we just don't know what to do with these children. So helping states to understand in clear terms what their obligations are to these children. So the resolution from the Human Rights Council was drafted, and the resolution required the Committee on the Rights of the Child to develop this general comment. And as part of that process, at the Consortium for Street Children, we coordinated consultations with children around the world, which Dedho took part in. So we've got a nice bit of circular action here today with you as well. And hundreds of children, in fact thousands of children, were consulted. Children in street situations or children who had previously been in street situations about what was important to them, so that the general comment was grounded in their realities and the rights challenges that they faced in their day-to-day lives. So the comment was adopted in 2017, so we're 5 years on from the adoption of the general comment. And like with all pieces of international law, it's not a process where you write a general comment and click your fingers and everything is solved. It's hard work, and the drafting of the comment was, for us, really the start of the hard work. So we work with our network, and we do a huge amount of training for our 200 plus network members, including Laura and Apprentis at some points as well, to help our partners understand what child rights are and what the general comment says, because very often our partners are very small organisations in rural communities who work on the ground doing direct service provision, and they just haven't got time to think about human rights law. So we train them, we help them to use it, and we work with the committee and with state governments themselves to help them implement the comment and bring it to life. But we've got a long way to go. We're at the beginning of the process.
Okay, vous avez bien préparé la...
So you've really prepared everything, the ground for the next questions. So what about your involvement in the general comment? How were you chosen? Now, what was your personal contribution to the process? And were you heard? Well, why was I chosen? I was chosen because I come from a street situation and because I had 1 foot, well, I was helped at Apprenti d'Auteuil. It was thanks to Apprenti d'Auteuil, thanks to the foundation that sorry, I can't be clear about it, sorry. And then, sorry, just remind me of your second question. What did you debate? What kind of subjects did you debate? Well, we talked about all of the problems that children in street situations encounter. Prostitution in Eastern countries, for example. We were in Europe, so poverty, everything relating to respect or non-respect of laws. And did you like the final result? Yes, insofar as we took part from A to Z in the drafting of General Comment 21. So we had no doubt that something would come out of it, that day in 2017 was useful. And so thanks to this day, that's here we are. So Joseph Likibi, you try and work with all kinds of organizations. That's what Lucy says, sorry. She works with all kinds of organizations. Are you just as involved in the implementation, in the explanation of these results? Yes, I wanted to explain that. In REIPER, it's like the after-sales service. The laws are there, the recommendations are there. Nobody understands, nobody knows that they exist. I don't know how that happens. So all of these laws, all of these conventions have to be explained, first of all, to the children, so that they know that they are concerned. So we, they need to know that there are texts that concern them. So we do that work. There's the convention. We tell them about the convention. But there are sometimes civil servants who are not aware of these things. So they don't know about labor conditions, for example. So we take the time to explain to them. We try, there are lessons. And sometimes we even ask UNICEF. We say we want to have copies of the convention because we've been raising awareness over the past 10 years. And every time people say, well, can we have a copy of the convention? So it's the case that UNICEF, but then we hear that it's the government that has to ask. So that's, we say, well, that's what we're working on. So it's, we explain, first of all, the existence of this convention. So if I don't know that something exists, I can't clamor for it. So first of all, I have to be informed of what exists. So the children have to be informed. And then it's important that the children are able to claim their rights. So we have examples.
Des sensibilisations. Alors, on a commencé à Brazzaville, c'est la capitale. Après, il faut aller dans tout le pays, tout le monde demande. Bon,
we started in Brazzaville, in the capital. Everyone's asking for it, but we're not always able to go through the entire country to disseminate the convention or the laws that exist. Let me just ask a question to Mrs. Ayoubi Idrissi. We see that the instruments exist. There's the problem of dissemination now. Do you share that point of view? Yes, I agree completely, because we realize when we receive when we meet parties, we ask, did you disseminate the General Comment 21? Did you make it accessible to the people who are concerned, the children in particular? So those are very pointed questions that we ask, and we realize that the work on dissemination, on accessibility, on making the document accessible, and even making an effort to adapt the document to children according to their ages by translating it to make it the most accessible possible in some dialects. We have to think of children with situations of disability. There are all kinds of disabilities, children who are deprived of their freedom for other reasons. They're hospitalized, etc. So we don't realize that we have to make a real effort, and that the states have to really invest a lot in dissemination and making the documents accessible to all of the parties, those who work with the children, for the children, but essentially for the children. And we've unfortunately realized, and this isn't just in countries with economic difficulties, but we realized even in developed countries, children were not aware of the Convention on the Rights of Children. We asked, are you aware of it? They'd say no. Or we've worked a little bit on the Convention on the International Day of the Rights of the Child. But there's still a lot of work to be done, a real investment to be made in dissemination, training, and information about the rights of the child. So we'll move on to the third part of our debate, and please send your questions online and prepare them in the room. We'll take questions in 15 minutes or so that you can participate, and I'm sure that there are points that interest you. I would like to talk about, we talked a lot about the states. Madame Idrissi, you talked about this already, but are there differences? What are the limits? And I'm going to be a bit provocative, but I'm sure you'll allow me. What are the champion states and regions, and which are the worst in this field? I'm going to be non-discriminatory and say that people are becoming more aware, but the difficulties persist, and the difficulties are really linked to awareness raising. There has to be a real political will. There has to be a real will to deal with the problems of children in street situations. It's not just dependent on the economic resources of a country. It's really based in the country's political will to make the children visible. All children count. You can't leave any child on the side of the road. But I'm not going to tell you who are the good countries and who are the bad ones. I'm starting with the principle that we have to push the states to give the best of themselves. We have to help them to become aware that they are committed. And a commitment is very important. When you commit to something, you have to respect them. They have to respect the rights of the children, protect the rights of the children, and make them effective. The convention was adopted 30 years ago, and the children in street situations already existed under different names. There were other situations that existed, but they weren't necessarily visible. So this is the work that's been done by the committee to get the states to realize that all children count. In migrant children, children in street situations, refugee children, asylum seekers, victims of exploitation, victims of armed conflict. So there are special measures that have to be taken to protect each child and allow them all to really have their rights. You talked about a jackhammer, as my friend talked about the jackhammer yesterday, and we really are jackhammers. What I can say is there's work to be done in all states. When a state more or less succeeds with one chapter, they're missing another chapter. So there's still work to be done for everyone. Thank you very much. Dedho, is this enough to make countries aware, to raise awareness, to use the jackhammer? Is that enough? I would like it to be enough, but I don't think it is. We have to show why it's beneficial for them to have these children become active members of society. They could end up a baker, a minister. So regardless of the place that they have in society, they have to be given the possibility to join society. And the countries have to understand that it's in their interest to help these children. I've been listening to you, and I see that there's a difference between a child and a child in a street situation. You're not, I feel like you're not seeing children, just children in the street. You're seeing a robber, a prostitute, a stranger, a rum. Is there an age at which you become a criminal? They're just children. You can't put a label on them so early. They're like Play-Doh. You can make something of them. And I think that we have to deal with this urgently.
Just to maybe return to your question about where things are being done well, we do have some successful examples in recent years since the adoption of the general comment, and also just to echo some of what's been said as well, that nowhere is perfect. There are champions, and some of the states that I'm going to mention now have made good progress, but everywhere has problems with this. And while one state might have excellent practice in one area, which education, for example, in health, they might be doing terribly, and another state might be better. So we have to be holistic in how we approach this. But our partners and our network members, since the adoption of General Comment in 2017, have been working very closely with their governments. And we were really excited that Uruguay was our pioneer country in implementing General Comment 21 in their country. Some of our partners in Uruguay, who I have to praise, they might be joining us, have done the most incredible piece of advocacy with their government. And the government of Uruguay have developed a national strategy on children in street situations, which covers all ministries of the government who have input with these children. That covers everything from the Ministry for the Economy to health to education, with the recognition that too often these children are passed between ministries. They're not our responsibility, they're not ours. So a national strategy that encompasses all of those ministries has really helped, and it was put to the test during the COVID pandemic. We knew we had this strategy, we didn't know if it would work. When COVID hit, the response in Uruguay was able to be quick, it was able to be meaningful and relevant because this strategy was in place. The strategy gave the government guidelines to follow about its obligations for the rights of these children, and told them how to work with civil society organisations to help them to understand how to prevent some of the awful situations we've seen for street children during the COVID pandemic from happening in Uruguay. We now have a second national strategy, which is in the Philippines. Again, we have an excellent partner in the Philippines who has worked incredibly hard on this, and that strategy has now been adopted and is being put into place. And we continue to work with lots of our other network members to help them. A national strategy doesn't work for every country. It's a great approach, but it isn't right for everyone. So the way that the comment is implemented has to be responsive to the needs of the country and to fit the situation there. And that's what we are leading kind of our advocacy towards as we move forward. So it's not perfect, but there is progress, and we need to celebrate it when there is, and not always, we need to praise the states who are doing well to make the others want to get that praise as well.
Voilà, on a compris, si j'ai bien compris Joseph tout à l'heure, il y a un peu de problème chez vous, hein? C'est pas encore là.
So Joseph, you said there are some problems in your country. How can les apprentis d'Auteuil help you in Congo? So les apprentis d'Auteuil, with their international programs, you're in touch. How can you support your country, your partners in the field, so that they can have an impact in the general dissemination to the governments? As Lucy said, the role of associations is important. We observe that in other African countries, in South America and Asia, in order to really make progress with governments on the question of children in street situations, these children have different profiles, different stories, different problems, and it's essential to work closely with the government together to really share the expertise of the associations. We talked a lot about the fact that associations work with very small means, and that's true for our partners. But at the same time, they've developed expertise that's just incredible on how the children are in street situations, what programs can help these children, and what's really working. What's working in their sometimes 20-year experience. We think that we need to work very closely with the states at different levels, at the decentralized levels also. And when we work hand in hand with them, we make progress. And as Madame said, we make progress chapter by chapter. It's important for us that the countries adopt a global, holistic child protection strategy for children in street situations, because often we see that countries have set up measures, but they had to fail because the profile of the children was not the right one. It's not easy to develop the appropriate solutions depending on the children's age, profile, and story. To give you a concrete example, children who have just arrived in the street situations and others who have lived in the streets for many years with their families, they don't have the same attitude. So the coordination between associations, government, and private stakeholders is vital. Joseph talked about recognizing the rights of the child. This is not theoretical. The international laws remind us that this is fundamental, but tangibly, we know that the best knowledge of children comes from the police. In many countries, they sometimes pick up the children, and this can lead to the death of some children, send them to prison, hunt them from where they are, chase them, humiliate them. So the training of the police officers is very important, and agents of the state. Joseph earlier said that REIPER is developing a lot of actions towards the representatives of the state for them to learn about children in street situations. And in action, the lack of solutions put in place by the state is often linked to poor knowledge of these children and the possibilities that exist, how we can turn around the story of these children who can in future become very talented.
Question un peu différemment quand j'ai entendu maintenant c'est ça. Si vous avez maintenant en face vos collègues de Paris, d'Apprentis d'Auteuil.
So if you have your colleagues from Apprentis d'Auteuil and the Consortium for Street Children, and if you have the Committee on the Rights of the Child just in front of you, what would you say to them? What should they be doing for you? You know, you're in the field, you're close to those children in street situations. So the states have made promises to international institutions. When I was a child, when, you know, a promise is a debt, I was told. So states have made promises, they've committed, and when they come along to our countries, there are lots of different stakeholders, so, you know, civil society, you know, and it's good that everybody be involved because children concern everybody. It's important for civil societies to have their role to play. The media have a role to play as well. So we invited media in our country and we said, you're not talking about children enough. And the journalist said, but we've never had any information about children. We've never had training about these children. We don't know how to talk about them. And these are, you know, questions that need to be raised. It's not about going back to school, but, you know, it's about awareness raising. So letting each stakeholder help add their brick to the building. So, you know, we need openings. We need NGOs to have openings, to have possibilities. They need to be able to set up partnerships in order to develop actions focusing on these questions. I talked about training, and there's an action plan for circulating the Convention on Children's Rights. But, you know, we should be able to do it. What we want is to be able to exert pressure. So we need the states to open up the doors so that other stakeholders can develop actions and contribute in this way to the implementation of the promises that the state made to international organizations. Okay. So we've heard all of your positions, and we can compare that to the reality in the field. Whereabouts are we when it comes to improving the situation? What stage are we at? What is the action plan for the future, Mrs. Ayoubi Idrissi? I don't, you know, there's no secrets. Things are very clear. States need to take on their responsibility. And to take on their responsibility, as Mr. Likibi said, and as other speakers have said, it's not just about making promises. It's about making sure that these promises become very concrete actions. An action plan, or rather a strategy for protecting children, has to be drawn up properly, and for it to succeed. And it's not politicians or strategies or action plans that we are missing. The committee taught us that sometimes we have to deal with states who have so many legal texts that are so very well done, but it's the implementation that is wrong. There are action plans and strategies, but what about, you know, the way they are implemented? So you've got to look at how things are drawn up, how things are implemented, what are the means that have been attributed. You have to wonder whether there is a clear vision, we're talking about children in street situations. And these children in situations, you know, if we want to have concrete actions, we need to think about them. So it's about data collection, and it's not easy to collect data. It's not a homogeneous community either. We're talking about different types of children. Some of them are with their families, some of them sleep in the streets, etc., etc. So we have to be aware of this lack of homogeneity. We need to know what the data is. How many children are we talking about? And for how many children do we have to draw up a plan? Then we can think about the means. And then we've got to think about other questions. When we talk about children, they, you know, trust us. Civil society is a local agent, so we've got to make sure that we focus on the local aspect, and then we have to think about coordination. Civil society has to be involved, but there's another partner. When I was talking about the process for drawing up action plans or strategies, that process has to involve the people who are concerned. And this, I always use what the children say, nothing for us without us. So these children in street situations need to be very closely associated and involved in the thinking and the drawing up and the implementation of these different strategies and action plans. They need to be involved. They are on the receiving end, and they need to be agents of their own rights. It mustn't just be theoretical. These children, if they're involved if they're consulted, then that's what's important. So that's the process. So there's the involvement of different stakeholders, so civil society, there's the private sector, which is also very important. But there's a whole architecture that we need to think about. We need to think about coordination, and it's up to the state to coordinate. It's up to the state to find a mechanism for some form of horizontal and vertical coordination so that we can succeed with this challenge. That's what's missing. So we don't have enough means. So we've got the action plan that might have been adopted in such and such a year. And then you need to look about the implementation. Has anything been implemented? Why? Well, because the budget had not been taken into account. It hadn't been attributed. And the stakeholders who were supposed to be involved were not involved. Everything was centralized instead of making it more locally focused. Or there's something else that's, that we need to think about. The action plan, it might have not have been carried out, but it came to an end. What was the impact? Was the impact of the action plan measured? An action plan that focusing on the promotion and protection of children? Was there some kind of assessment made after the action plan that led to another action plan being implemented? These are the different questions so that we can move from something theoretical to something more practical. Sorry, I'm going on. No, it's very good. It's very important, very interesting.
You have your examples in the Philippines and in Uruguay. Which part of the architecture was key that you had this impact and you really had an impact in these countries?
I think, as Laura was saying a few minutes ago, it's strong civil society partners who understand the rights framework and who are willing to fight and use all of their resources.
Fight means what?
Fight means whatever it means in the context. For some of our partners, that means confronting the government and challenging them. For other partners, that means working hand in hand.
How far can you go?
We would never tell our partners how far to go. They know their context better than we ever could, and we trust their judgment. And civil society partners who've listened to the children that they work with, because ultimately a plan that, as Hynd is saying, as a plan that hasn't listened to the children it's for will never work. We see governments time and again say, okay, we've built this fancy new school, we'll sweep all the children off the streets of the city and we'll put them in this school. 24 hours later, they've all run away because they hate it, because nobody asked them what they want and because it doesn't provide them with what they need. So strong civil society partners who listen to children are what, in my opinion, is what is needed to make sure this architecture and these strategies actually do what they're meant to.
Okay, I think this was very clear. Vous pouvez m'envoyer les questions des internautes?
Can we have the questions from people listening to us online? Are you ready? I don't have them. But of course, we can have questions from the public here, from the audience here in the room. You've already got a lot of information. We have a first question from the lady over there, and then a second question. Can you please introduce yourself? Who do you represent? And then ask your question, and you can choose your speaker.
And I am working with Action for Development, an organization which is very, I would say, we are active in Afghanistan and we are working with street working children in Afghanistan. So thank you very much for giving some highlights in this area. But my question was actually about the fact that you spoke about the countries where there are governments. Unfortunately, in Afghanistan, we all know that there is not a recognized government, and even the group which is there, it has its own problems. In Afghanistan, there are around 3 million children who are working on the streets to survive. Is there any type of strategy you would like to recommend or you have in mind for those countries who are in conflict, in war at the moment?
Okay, je pense que la question elle est d'actualité.
So that's a very hot topic. It's current affairs.
Madame Ayoubi nous donne la deuxième partie. In war situation, is this an additional layer where you have to intervene.
Absolutely, and it makes addressing the issues that street children are facing so much more difficult when there's an additional layer of priority for other states as well. We've seen this with COVID as well, to kind of give you an example where a state's attention has been so focused on a crisis that the ongoing crisis of children in street situations is overlooked, underfunded, and often forgotten. At Consortium for Street Children, we have 2 members of our network in Afghanistan who work directly with street children there. When the current administration took over a few months ago, we worked closely with our partners there to see how we could help and to see what we can do. And to be honest with you, it's slow progress. And I think given the current situation, it has to depend on the area of the country that we're talking about and the situation within the city or within the village that we're focusing on. I would be very happy to connect with you afterwards and to speak about this situation specifically and think about a strategy, but it would need to be specific and focused on the situation. I don't think there's a blanket approach that can be used in the situation as it currently stands.
Madame Ayoubi, Idrissi, est-ce que parfait.
Mrs. Ayoubi, Idrissi, this context of war, conflict, either international or civil, are there specific characteristics to be taken into account? How do you intervene in this kind of situation? Because it's even more critical in this context. So talking about the case of Afghanistan, the Committee on the Rights of the Child adopted very quickly a declaration destined after the change in Afghanistan. So a declaration attracting people's attention to the necessity and obligation to respect the fundamental rights of children. Now, there was a first declaration that was made by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and then other declarations followed, made involving special procedures and other bodies. And the last declaration was when the Taliban decided not to open schools again and prevented girls from accessing education. So the committee uses the means that it has available, in other words, reminding states of their obligations without forgetting, as the speaker said, that of course there's no government. So the committee examined the report for Afghanistan before the events. So there isn't really a government. But what are the functions of the committee? Examine the report, make recommendations, the right recommendations that need to be imposed. And when there are crisis situations, so declarations have to be adopted to alert national opinion, international opinion, to draw attention to the state and to make sure that the minimum number of rights are followed. So the respect, dignity of children, their right to be fed, they need to be protected, including when there are situations of conflict. So the means that the committee has are used, and they're continuing to having discussions with all of the parties that can work in the field and that are still authorized to work in the field. They're following everything with a lot of attention. They're following what's happening. And of course, they're very impatient. They want to be able to dialogue with the representatives of the state about the real situation. And how to face that situation.
The answer, I mean, what you can take away is anyway, both of our experts are very much interested to discuss this with you in detail. So take the advantage of this, and particularly afterwards, or whenever you want, you take the point from them. On a une autre question par le collègue de Madame Ayoubi.
We have another question. It's more of a quick comment. They're not simply countries that are at war and are absent from the dialogue that we can have with them. But there are some countries with no civil society, and civil society is often risking their lives to act. And as Laura said, the real element of progress in a country depends on a regime that, or a political system that authorizes the investment of civil society. It's really fundamental. Otherwise, it's very difficult. Otherwise, you're only doing humanitarian work and you're not doing any skills development, associating all of the actors in the field. My question concerns a comment from Dedho on the importance of remarking the investment that we have for this cause for the state, and why the change of image that we should encourage about children in street situations. In your respective actions, are there ways of putting children in street situations alongside the actors in the same room, getting them to work together so that we can learn to get to know each other, to work together, so we can drop the filters, the labels that we have and that people have despite themselves? Do you have some examples of that? Dedho, were you ever in the situation where you were around the table with, when you were a minor or an adult, and not yet with the apprenti? No, that never happened. It was the apprenti that brought us around the table. Now things are more possible than they used to be. And that's part of your approach, to bring young people around the table with others. Absolutely, this is a key point that Philippe just underscored. We think that the starting point is to create this meeting, get children to meet with the authorities and representatives of the state. Joseph has lots of examples. We think that it's this meeting that will make it possible to take the first step to awareness that these children are just children like others, and then to co-build solutions with them that can be set up, because we've talked about it over the last 2 days. They have a lot to teach us, a lot to let us know just that what they would like to do. And I think that just that meeting, and we see it in many examples, that would make it possible for us to realize that there are lots of these kids that want to go to school, that want training, who aspire to different professions. And I think that, Joseph, you could tell us about this in Brazzaville, how this meeting can take place. There are several examples. I'll take one. Each year we organize roundtables. When we celebrate the June 16th and November 20th, at these roundtable discussions, we invite the authorities from the politicians, they invite the press, and we invite children. In 2019 and in 2021, the authorities said to us, they criticized us. In our culture, there are questions that we shouldn't talk about in front of children. And I said, we can't do that. The children have to express themselves. We're talking about the rights of the child. And in the discussions, there were people who said, the rights of child don't concern us. That's for the Western civilizations. You're going to be teaching things that will cause them to revolt against us. It was in the Trois Glorieuses college, junior high school. It's not just adults, even children speak like this. When you have the right to care, why? The right to health care only concerns others and not me. So I explained to my colleagues that rights concern all of us, not just others. So that makes us want to continue to explain. We work with vulnerable children, children in street situations, and we realize that even those who are in a normal junior high school are not aware of their rights, and other children are not aware. So we really need to explain, and to explain, the children have to come and say, this is what we need. I think that's very telling.
It's for you. What to do when ratification is not followed up by application of the law? And he specifies, I think our colleague is in Senegal, particularly in Senegal, where kids are not only in the street, but they are exploited, there's a situation in the street.
This is a problem we see very, very frequently with where our members come to us and say, well, they've ratified this, but nothing is happening. And as you were just saying, Joseph, sometimes it's about speaking the right language to the government at the right time. We often find, for obvious reasons, that economic arguments are more successful than human rights arguments with governments. If you can say to them, you know, it's cheaper to prevent the problem than to solve it, that sometimes is much more effective than going down a child rights angle when there might be some cultural sensitivities or just bad feeling towards child rights as a concept. So sometimes we do have to go in via the route that's most amenable to us, and that isn't always the one that we would necessarily choose with our hearts, but we follow where there's an opportunity. We find the openings, and I'd be very happy to speak to our colleague in Senegal about that particular example as well.
But he was more specific even. He was talking about not only the kids in the streets or in the street situation, but that they're, on the top of it, they're exploited. Is that something part also of your strategies to tackle this issue at the same time as the protection?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are very, very few examples I can think of where children in street situations aren't being exploited in some way or another. Okay. That's the baseline for us, to be quite frank, and that forms a fundamental part of what we do. And often interventions from us and from our partners, and I think for the same for Apprentis partners, start with the minimization of harm, the reduction of harm, the reduction of the exploitation. And it's only once you've addressed those really urgent and critical issues that you can dig down into some of the more structural issues that are at the core.
Okay. On a une autre question par un internaute. En quoi consistent les formations?
We have another question. What's the training on General Comment 21 with OSCs, civil society organizations? I wasn't sure about that abbreviation. So the training to get. So how do we train civil society organizations? How do you train your partners? So the General Comment 21, our partners are aware of it. They work with it every day to defend the rights of children. What the text says is what we would like these states to implement. So we have to get the general comment known. That's what the consortium was sharing earlier. They're developing training so that people can understand the text and use it and not leave it in a drawer, and to challenge the authorities on what is possible to be done, what works in other countries. So setting up what we said earlier, a holistic child protection strategy with an associated and sufficient budget. This is a topic we touched on, but if you look on the budget devoted to child protection in many countries of the world, it's worrisome. Let's ask the question clearly: are we lacking money? Yes. It's possible to have additional means, and this is the work that we do with the countries to say the children have to be a priority for the countries. There are children. So when we look at the budgets are insufficient in many countries, and it's a starting point to be able to set up action plans that exist. And how could we get the money earmarked for this cause?
To the question that Laura was answering about General Comment 21 training, and then come to the budget question. So we deliver a massive programme of training on General Comment 21, and we have an online e-learning course which is dedicated to training civil society on the General Comment. So it gives very small organisations with no background in child rights an introduction to what child rights are and what the General Comment specifically says to help them understand and use it in their work. And we also roll out training across our network, kind of in person when we can, or online training to help our network and understand it. We've also developed a child-friendly version of the General Comment in simple language for children to understand, which has been translated into over 20 languages to help children themselves understand what the General Comment says and what their rights are. In terms of budget, was the question who can give governments money?
No, who can support governments with earmarked money? That means that they have to use it for this cause. Is there somewhere manna coming from heaven?
I think, as Laura said, my answer would be it's a question of priority.
No, but I'm asking the precise question on money. We are in Switzerland. So let's talk about money.
Well,
who could provide? We fully understand that Congo probably has other priorities. But if you tell them, listen, here is a bunch of money to use for this issue, would they do the job? Est-ce qu'ils feraient le travail si on leur dit, voilà, là, vous avez 500 000 francs?
Would they do the work if we said here are 500,000 Swiss francs to attack this topic? Would they agree to do it? It could be dangerous to give money like that if you haven't prepared what you're going to do with it. There are action plans, projects, objectives, and it's with that we can use the money. If the money just drops from the sky, even the best experts might not know what they're going to do with it. If you have money, no project, no plan, no objective, it could be a bit complicated. We work with objectives. When I was in primary school, the teacher would give you a problem to solve, and some people could find a solution in 2 minutes and say, I'm done. And the teacher would say, go up to the blackboard and explain how you did it. And they didn't know how, because they didn't know how the approach. Maybe they copied on their neighbor, but you have to set up the processes first so that everyone understands where they're going, so that we can work more effectively. For the NGOs, we're in countries where we're suspected of collecting money for ourselves. That's a debate with the states. So we have to have results. The results give us credibility.
OK, on arrive plus ou moins au bout de cette session. Est-ce qu'il y a encore une ou deux questions dans la salle? Ah, il y a une question.
So there's a question in the room. We're more or less at the end. This is a question for Mrs. Ayoubi. We saw you yesterday on the podium, but perhaps you could... I'm in charge of the program focusing on children in street situations. About the reticence that states often have when it comes to applying the ratified convention. We have the impression, in fact, that ratifying the convention makes people happy, but, people don't really want to. When we listen to the example of Joseph, wouldn't it be better to restructure things? It's a bit like imposing something, and it's ratified because people want it to be ratified, but there's no kind of groundwork, co-building work. There's no work done to think about things with states so that they are more involved in the setting up of this kind of thing. So I'm hearing you the question, but I'm sure you have an idea of what needs to be done. And I'm sure she has an answer. I'm sure that you already have an answer in mind. Yes, as you said, I think that normally you're right. When it comes to states, many states commit because, well, they commit, but and they think that the implementation will follow suit. But that's not always the case. That's something that should happen when the convention is signed, when the convention is ratified. And then when you move on to the obligation and requirement phase, it's important to commit to implementing the treaty by developing means. Let me talk about means very quickly. It's important to be careful when you ask states to implement the Convention of Children's Rights according to their means. That doesn't just mean the means that the states have. It means that the means that the state has, however small they are, they need to be used as best as possible to implement the international commitments, and in this case, the implementation of the Convention of Children's Rights and the protocol. Let's not forget that in the convention, it says along with international cooperation. So the international community has a duty to help states that are not able to fulfill all of their obligations when it comes to ratified treaties. So there's that side of the question. But let me come back to your idea of reworking things. That's what other partners need to do. Now, there are specialized agencies like the United Nations. There's a whole work to be done with these specialized agencies of the United Nations so that states realize what their obligations are. UNICEF, for example, is a partner in most developing countries. So they need to do the groundwork. They need to make states aware of their obligations, the obligations weighing down on them because of the ratification. And let me just point out another means. So states present their reports in front of the Council of Rights as part of the universal periodic examination. Since that has been the case, obligations are better taken into account by states. We haven't reached the stage that we wanted to reach, but we're closer to it. There's better commitment on behalf of states, but there are other means that we can implement in order to push the states further towards what we want, fight against corruption, for example, so that children's rights are better implemented, so that there is better governance and better budgeting for children, so based on the right kind of approach. Thank you for that. Anyway, we're going to conclude, but Dedho, would you like to give us some final words? We've been talking for an hour and a half. We've been talking about children, the perception of children, and we've been talking about their protection, the rules, the laws, the general comment, the impact on states. What is the message for you? A lot of hope, but an internationally recognized day for children in street situations. That's a way of bringing together the teamwork between associations, states, and the people concerned. So lots of hope, but you know, I'm waiting to see. So Dedho is asking for an international day for children in street situations, an official day, because for the moment it's not official.
Okay, I think work in progress. C'est une bonne conclusion pour cette soirée.
That's a good conclusion for the evening. I'd like to thank the different speakers, Joseph Dedho, Lucy, Laura, and Mrs. Ayoubi Idrissi for the debate. I think that we've made small baby steps, but what's important is to talk about it, and I think we've managed that. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Tu me chasses.
Merci beaucoup, Tony, pour avoir modéré cette discussion avec beaucoup de brio, avec beaucoup de compétences. Merci beaucoup les intervenants pour votre apport extrêmement apprécié. Merci beaucoup aussi Madame Hynd Ayoubi Idrissi au Maroc. Merci beaucoup Madame la vice-présidente du Comité des droits de l'enfant pour vos interventions très matures et très spontanées en même temps. Nous avons vraiment profité pendant ces 2 jours d'échanges très, très, très riche, justement, d'abord pour définir la problématique et après pour aussi trouver des solutions. Et puis, je pense qu'en ces 2 jours, vous avez eu vraiment l'opportunité aussi d'échanger et d'écouter quelles pourraient aussi être les différentes solutions. Comme je vous ai dit en début de séance, maintenant j'ai le grand plaisir de donner la bienvenue à Monsieur le conseiller administratif de la ville de Genève, Alfonso Gomez, qui va dire quelques mots, qui va faire un petit discours de clôture. Hier, nous avons eu la chance d'avoir Madame Nathalie Fontanet, conseillère d'État, qui ouvrait la conférence. Aujourd'hui, nous avons la ville de Genève qui clôt la conférence. Nous sommes très bien entourés. Merci, bienvenue, Alfonso.
Merci, cher Mario. Il y a plein d'anciens CICR, ce que je vois. C'est toujours un plaisir de vous retrouver, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames, Messieurs, c'est évidemment pour moi un très grand plaisir de pouvoir vous adresser ces quelques mots de clôture après ces 2 journées de conférence. J'aimerais, évidemment, cela a été examiné pendant ces 2 jours de haut niveau. Vous avez vu certainement et entendu un certain nombre de données, de chiffres. Vous savez que dans le monde, il y a entre 120 et 150 millions d'enfants qui sont contraints de vivre tout ou partie de leur vie dans la rue. Et c'est évidemment des êtres particulièrement vulnérables, des personnes qui sont privées de leurs droits les plus élémentaires, les plus fondamentaux. Ils sont confrontés à divers phénomènes susceptibles de porter atteinte à leur vie, à leur survie, à leur développement, à leur intégrité. Dans de nombreux pays, en plus, ces derniers temps, ces derniers mois, les conséquences sociales, les conséquences économiques liées à la crise sanitaire du Covid-19 ont encore, malheureusement, aggravé cet état de fait. Pourtant, alors que la quasi-totalité des États a ratifié la Convention des Nations Unies relative aux droits de l'enfant, de trop nombreuses politiques nationales n'incluent toujours pas les enfants en situation de rue. C'est dans ce contexte très préoccupant que la Fondation Apprentis d'Auteuil internationale a souhaité remettre la protection des enfants en situation de rue à l'agenda de la Genève internationale et des États qui sont présents ici à Genève. Durant ces 2 jours, les conférences que vous avez proposées ont agi comme une véritable plateforme d'échange autour de ces grands défis. Ils ont rencontré sur le terrain des gens qui travaillent sur le terrain et aussi des gens qui amènent des solutions durables afin de répondre à ces fléaux. Ces 2 jours de conférence sont donc pour nous venus à point nommé pour raviver ces enjeux que je trouve un peu oubliés ici et ailleurs. Et enfin, et c'est ça le but, pour nous mobiliser. Ces journées, ils rappellent cette nécessaire prise de conscience et nous montrent que des solutions sont possibles. Ces journées, ce sont des sources, encore une fois, d'inspiration pour chacune et chacun d'entre nous. Ce soir, mesdames et messieurs, je voudrais profiter donc de l'occasion qui m'est donnée pour saluer cette initiative, pour saluer le travail de manière plus globale que font les apprentis d'Auteuil, ce remarquable travail qu'elles développent à travers le monde. Et avec ses partenaires internationaux, elle se mobilise en effet sans relâche pour faire respecter les droits des enfants en situation des rues et des jeunes qui sont exclus des systèmes scolaires. Il s'agit de mettre en place effectivement des projets de qualité visant une réelle réinsertion de ces enfants de manière durable. Ce faisant, la Fondation Apprentis d'Auteuil internationale privilégie toujours une démarche d'accompagnement holistique et place systématiquement l'intérêt supérieur de l'enfant et des jeunes au cœur de sa démarche. Je le salue également ici. Elle se fait ce porte-voix nécessaire des enfants en situation de rue qui n'ont pas de voix, alertant inlassablement la communauté nationale et internationale sur le vécu, sur les mesures indispensables à prendre. Je félicite encore donc très sincèrement ce formidable travail qui a été déployé. Je salue également évidemment les différentes représentantes et représentants des organisations actives dans ce domaine qui ont participé à ces 2 jours de conférence et qui luttent également pour améliorer les conditions de vie des plus jeunes à travers le monde. Genève, mesdames et messieurs, est la ville où a germé l'idée des droits de l'enfant. Et cela avec l'adoption dès 1924 par la Société des Nations de la Déclaration de Genève sur les droits des enfants. Genève, c'est aussi la ville de Jean-Jacques Rousseau, qui est quand même le premier philosophe à avoir soutenu cette idée saugrenue que l'enfant n'était pas seulement un problème, pas seulement un être imparfait, faible et inexpérimenté, mais qu'il était également un être humain avec sa propre logique et ses propres besoins. Genève est donc, et la ville de Genève, très attachée aux droits des enfants. Elle soutient ainsi de nombreux projets à travers la délégation que j'ai l'honneur de présider, la délégation de Genève Ville Solidaire, afin de défendre les droits fondamentaux à travers le monde, dont plusieurs spécifiquement en lien avec les enfants en situation de rue. En parallèle, la ville de Genève s'engage, à son échelle bien entendu, pour mettre en œuvre cette fameuse convention relative aux droits de l'enfant au niveau local. Donc au niveau international, il y a une action. N'oublions pas non plus que même au niveau local, il y a du travail à faire. Il faut également protéger ici les plus faibles. Et je pense particulièrement aux enfants handicapés et favoriser évidemment la possibilité pour ces enfants de suivre une scolarité inclusive. Je pense également aux enfants ici qui vivent dans des conditions précaires et particulièrement les mineurs non accompagnés, les enfants de migrants qui doivent avoir une scolarité et des conditions de vie décentes encore aujourd'hui, à mon sens, trop longuement refusées. En 2018, la ville de Genève obtenait le label de l'UNICEF comme commune amie des enfants. C'est une reconnaissance internationale importante pour nous. Elle prime les efforts, nos engagements en matière des droits de l'enfant. Nous devons, et bien entendu, continuer. Je compte sur vous pour nous y pousser, pour nous le rappeler. Et malgré des apparences, et bien que la situation semble comme ça globalement satisfaisante, je dois donc remplir plusieurs défis. J'en ai parlé tout à l'heure, en matière sociale, en matière politique, en matière culturelle et en matière d'intégration, et principalement en matière d'intégration de cette population migrante. Et puis, comme l'ont tristement mis en lumière les images des files d'attente lors des distributions de colis alimentaires en 2020, la précarité est aussi une réalité dans notre propre ville. Selon l'Université de Genève, au plus fort de la crise, vous savez que plus de 700 personnes, y compris des enfants, étaient sans domicile ici à Genève. Cela, bien entendu, est totalement intolérable sur un territoire aussi riche. Comme vous le savez peut-être, je suis également en charge des finances. J'ai eu aujourd'hui le loisir d'annoncer que nous avons une économie florissante, donc nous avons aujourd'hui également les moyens de répondre à ces défis. Ces chiffres sont là, les chiffres dans notre ville, bien sûr, dans notre canton, au niveau du monde. Vous les connaissez, 150 millions d'enfants qui travaillent dans le monde, dont la moitié dans des conditions dangereuses, 260 millions d'enfants et de jeunes qui ne sont pas scolarisés, et enfin 350 millions d'enfants qui vivent dans une extrême pauvreté à travers le monde. Donc, la tâche est importante, elle n'est pas impossible, elle n'est pas titanesque, mais elle est importante là-bas, mais également ici. Ici comme ailleurs, les enfants constituent le maillon le plus faible de notre société, tout en incarnant l'avenir. Nous avons donc le devoir de les protéger. Nous avons donc le devoir de leur offrir des conditions de vie dignes, quelle que soit leur origine, bien entendu, quelle que soit leur provenance. Je suis certain que ces 2 jours de discussion nous ont permis d'avancer vers cet objectif. Du moins, ils nous ont rappelé à une triste réalité. Et c'est dans ce dessein, en tout cas, que je vous assure le soutien plein et entier de la ville de Genève. Et je vous remercie pour ces 2 jours de conférence. Merci.